Hello, everybody, and welcome to the UnWokable podcast. I'm your host, Mark Owsley, and I am joined today by the incomparable Jeff Charles. Jeff is a writer for Newsweek. He's written for Red State. He has his own Substack, which I will let him plug because he'll do it much better than me. But I just wanted to thank you for being here, Jeff.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm excited about this. My new Substack, it's about 2 weeks old, and it's where I put all my satire that people love on Twitter. So it's called The Smattering, and you can check it out at smatteringnews.substack.com. So check that out. Be sure to subscribe. And also, I'm the host of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles as well, my own podcast. So
Yes, and that's actually what tuned me into you, and then obviously your Twitter. Your Twitter exploits, which are legendary, of course, as are all of us. But well, hey, I brought Jeff on the show today because we are both Red State conservatives or Red State unwoke, if you want to say it that way. And I think I've been interested in getting someone, and I think from Texas to talk to, because I have not been able to really find anybody. And Jeff is the perfect guy because I think there's a lot of, I'm in Oklahoma, and there's a lot of parallels, I think, happening. I think Texas may be a little bit further down the road in terms of the infiltration of whether it's California or it's other blue states, people just flocking to Austin specifically, and that's where you're at. Yeah. So what has been your experience here in the last 2 or 3 years in Texas? How have you seen that red state change?
So I've been here for a little over 10 years. As far as the change, I can't say there's been a huge change because I'm actually one of those Californians that moved to Texas. I was originally born and raised in Southern California. Okay. The culture here in Austin, to me, is about the same because Austin is a very blue city. It's still Texas. People want to say that it's not really Texas. Well, it's not as far as the rural areas, but people still like their guns here in Austin. They just happen to be very much left-leaning. But what I have seen happen, which is happening across the country, is the issue with the schools and stuff like that. And the mistake that people make is that they think that this is mostly happening in blue states, which it is. But in Texas, it's all over the place. Like, if you're familiar with social media, if you're on Twitter, you see all those videos of the drag queen shows. Most of those are happening in Texas. And Dallas. I don't think so much in Austin yet. I'm actually kind of surprised about that. But in other areas of Texas, you're seeing that. In the schools, it is horrible. It is spread, this whole progressive ideology on race, sexuality, gender identity is spreading like a virus. And it's become a serious issue. And what this movement thrives on is the reality that most people don't know that it's happening. So when they hear about it, they may think it's just a one-off. But I've been talking to people across the state about this issue, and they're seeing it in their children's classrooms, and it's in other areas too. And the Republican governance that we have, it's taken some steps to kind of do something about it, but not a whole heck of a lot. But realistically, at the state level, there are certain things they can do, but a lot of this stuff is local.
Yeah. Well, what have you seen? Because that's very interesting. Oklahoma's the same way. I mean, we're talking about probably the two reddest states in the country, if you want to give it that. I mean, I think Florida is right on our tail,
right?
But which is a good sign. But because of coming from, and let me couch this, because you came from Southern California, so you spent a good portion of your life there, and obviously it's a one-party ruled state,
yes,
right? And I would put Oklahoma very much in that category too. It's a one-party ruled state, 82% Republican. But what I'm seeing here is because of that, there's this kind of laissez-faire, oh, nothing's going to go wrong here, that has kind of snuck up on Oklahoma. And I have some friends in Texas, and I think that's what you're describing, is that that have told me that very much the same thing you just have, that all of this has become very pervasive in Texas, in the public schools specifically. And people are shocked to hear that. But what I've been trying to tell people is, no, I think the red states are the front line because the blue states are gone.
Yeah,
in
yeah, they've
terms of,
already got them.
and we have all this focus on Boston or on other blue states that are having issues, but I see it more plainly in Idaho, in Texas, in Oklahoma, in Kansas, in Missouri, because that's where it's really being pushed. And it's really hard. I don't know if you've experienced this. It's really hard to get people to understand that. Have you experienced that? That where it's like people to get people to understand that, hey, the red states are actually the front line of this?
You know, I think when I point it out and when I give the examples, they start to get it, but we just need more of it. Um, and it's even in Texas's government. I mean, there are areas of like the Health and Human Services that are pushing a lot of this woke stuff. And what people don't realize, this didn't just start. It didn't just start 2 or 3 years ago. We just found out about it 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
They've been pushing. I mean, and I've spoken with teachers here in Texas and Florida and other areas of the country, and people who have been in the field for decades. And basically, the real start of this was probably when you and I were kids. That's when they first started pushing this, and they've been trying to do it gradually over the past few decades. But really, over the past 10 years is really when they've been pushing this really hard, and we just didn't find out about it. I mean, that's one of the silver linings of the whole COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown orders. Kids had to learn from home. They had to go over Zoom classes, which means that their parents were there with them, seeing what they were being taught. And that's when the backlash occurred. So we're playing catch up right now. They've already had tons of time to get their teeth into these schools. So I think that you're right. This is the front lines. The blue states are already gone. They're already on board with this stuff, or they're at least ambivalent about it. They don't really care. They don't think it's an issue. But in states like Texas and Oklahoma, if more people knew what was going on, you would see even more of a backlash than what you've even seen in Fairfax County, Virginia. Because a lot of people, I mean, I was talking to a lady yesterday whose kids are in a school in South Texas, predominantly Hispanic area. And Hispanics don't do that well.
Yeah, they don't mess with it. They don't mess with it at all. No,
Black people either. Very religious community.
Social conservatives,
Exactly. And then she told me that a lot of them just don't really understand how deep the problem is. So she's trying to help to educate people about like that. There's going to be a school board meeting in a couple of weeks that I'll be covering down there in South Texas. But I think that is the main reason why this has been allowed to spread, because people just don't know that it's happening.
Yeah. Well, and I want to hit on you hit something that I think is little known but needs to be talked about more, which is red state departments of health and human services. Because in Oklahoma, I'm telling you, and I've had meetings with the governor. I've had meetings with lots of legislators. I'm obviously, for Oklahoma, I've got a pretty decent following, which makes me more influential than maybe I should be. But it's gotten my voice in the room. But there has been a huge infiltration of the woke ideology through the Department of Health and Human Services. And I don't know about Texas, but in Oklahoma, that's run directly by the governor. And we have, a governor who is endorsed by Trump, was just endorsed by Governor Abbott, was just endorsed by Governor DeSantis, and, claims to be the most anti-abortion governor in the country, right? But seems to not have his own house in order. And in my experience, it's not because he doesn't know, because I happen to know he does know. You know what I mean? And so are you seeing that same kind of thing in Texas with your legislators, your governor? Are you getting an echo? Sorry.
No, and I think that's the same thing. I mean, now I'm not sure if Abbott knows what's going on, but by now he should. So I'm pretty sure that he does. I don't know if he's doing anything about it, but that's where we have to keep our Republicans accountable, because he has taken steps in other directions to combat this stuff. But if you've got the Health and Human Services Department and even the Texas Education Agency, TEA, a lot of this stuff is starting to be pushed by them as well. So it's like, I'm like, Governor, like, this is happening under your nose. You need to get rid of these people, because you can pass all the laws at the state level that you want. But if your own agencies are pushing this in schools, then it's not, then it doesn't matter. I mean, in Texas, like sex ed is not required. Schools don't have to teach it, but they can if they want to. So if your agency is encouraging them to bring in a lot of these outside groups, these nonprofits who teach this stuff, like TOPS, and I've been hearing about Love Notes, and then there's a lot of other organizations that have these curriculums and these trainings that are designed to sexualize children and to teach inappropriate material. So to combat this, it's going to require a multi-pronged strategy. But if our executive branches in our states aren't taking care of it at their level, then what can we do?
Yeah, well, it leaves the people, when they find out about things like, for example, Oklahoma, the Health and Human Services, the behavioral health apparatus is pushing definitions for women that are obviously wrong. I mean, and this is Oklahoma, right? Or calling men, anybody who decides to have a masculine identity, and that plus what happened with OU Children's here, where we're finding out they're doing underage transition surgeries. People lost their mind for a minute, because it's like, wait a minute, this is Oklahoma, and I've been trying to tell people that this is coming down mostly through the unification of behavioral health with the education department. And obviously our ed secretary or superintendent switched parties mid to run for governor right now. And Texas doesn't have a lot of that problem. But what are you seeing in terms of behavioral health in the schools? Because I just see that in Oklahoma as being a giant funnel for all of this, not just mental health, but behavioral health, something that it's an offshoot that they've almost redefined what mental health is. And that's coming in through social emotional learning. Have you seen a lot of that in Texas?
I was just about to bring up social emotional learning. Yeah. Because, and here's what's sneaky about it. And the school that I was just telling you about, it's not social emotional learning. At least that's not the label that they put on it. But what they do through these programs is they introduce these ideas under the guise of promoting health and wellness, teaching children how to be leaders, teaching children how to communicate better with their peers, because that all sounds wonderful. We all want that for our kids. Everybody wants them to be healthy, right? But what they're really doing is they're introducing some of those materials, but then along with that, they're putting in the LGBTQ agenda. And I'm not talking about, anti-bullying. You need to respect people regardless of their sexual preference or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm fine with that. But when they start talking about how men can be women, women can be men, and encouraging certain types of sexual thought or sexual conversations,
even just by bringing it up.
Just asking them what kind of experiences the kids have had, and bringing up and introducing these ideas. It's not even like the kids bring it up themselves. The teachers are prompting this stuff.
And I think that's where it hits most. And I just want to hit that for a second, because you bring that suicidal ideation, for example, right? You see in these student surveys, which I think is like kind of the genesis of the social emotional learning track. Is they take the surveys, right? But I looked at these surveys here in Oklahoma, and they ask about suicide, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 times over the course of the survey. And this is a very short survey. It's not that long, but it just seems to keep bringing it up. And with kids, especially younger kids, you can influence kids just by popping something into their mind.
You're right.
Yeah, and that's I just wanted to make that point for everybody who might be listening, because what Jeff is talking about here, we're this apex of just bringing up the gender ideology that moves into social emotional learning. So what is social emotional learning, Jeff?
So to put it in a nutshell, it's kind of what I was describing before. It's supposed to be a set of practices or a set of material that educators and other school staff are supposed to infuse into their learning, into their teaching. And ostensibly, this is designed to, again, help children be able to communicate with one another better, to not bully, to treat people with respect, all that kind of stuff. It's supposedly about emotional intelligence, that type of thing, teaching kids early how to be more emotionally intelligent. But what it really is, I mean, the conversation used to be about critical race theory, right?
Right.
It's just another way to introduce those aspects to critical race theory or ideas inspired by that. And then also the transgender, gender identity, all that other stuff. So it's basically a sneaky way to infuse progressive ideology on these topics to kids, because it's under the guise of something good, something that anybody would want. I mean, when you look up social emotional learning, it sounds great. I mean, when you start reading it, but when you actually dig into what that actually means and what they're actually teaching, it's basically just another vehicle to introduce this stuff. Like, if you notice, they're not talking about critical race theory as much anymore because that term has become verboten, even though they're still infusing that, but they're just doing it under the guise of social emotional learning. They're changing the names of it. So if a state like Florida passes the Stop Woke Act, they can say, "Oh, we're not doing critical race theory stuff. This is social emotional learning." So
well, and it's all implanted by divisions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Which is critical race theory. It is in practice, basically. But what I'm finding and let's take this back to red states get praised a lot. Okay, for what they do right, and that I find this phenomenon to be frustrating, having lived in a red state, because I see living here, of course, compared to Massachusetts, we're going to be doing better, right? Compared to California, we're going to be doing better. But what I feel like Texas and Oklahoma and Idaho specifically we're 10 years earlier down the same road that California went down. And it's like pulling teeth, man. It's like pulling teeth to get legislators, to get some of the people here to understand that, because the mindset is, nah, never here until they start seeing some of it's little by slowly and then all at once, right? And I know you're in Austin, so that puts you in kind of a blue dot in the middle of the Red Sea, right? But what other aspects outside of the school are you seeing Austin and the Texas ecosystem trickle that direction? Whether it's homelessness, whether it's, because I think all these things are very much connected.
So in other areas, and this is interesting, I do see more pushback, but I think it's because it's more visible. Like you mentioned homelessness. So in Austin, for years, we had a homeless camping ban. You couldn't just pitch a tent on the street and just camp there. About, I want to say 3, 4, 5 years ago, Mayor Steve Adler and the city council, which is all progressives, except not now, because there is one Republican on the city council. She's a friend of mine.
You got that in Austin. Wow.
Yeah, she got elected in 2020, I believe. She did a good job. But and we're having elections again now, but still. So they decided to rescind that homeless camping ban. And the result was tents all on the sidewalks, on underpasses, where people walk, where people bring their children, even in front of City Hall, even though the provision didn't allow camping in front of City Hall because they want themselves to be protected, but not everybody else.
Of course.
Yeah, we saw an uptick in crime. Last year, we had record level homicide rates. Now, that's not all homeless people. That's just in general, because they also push this whole defund the police crap here. But that homeless camping ban, everybody was mad about it. And I remember even covering a protest of this issue and getting people to sign petitions. And again, Austin is left. People vote Democrat in Austin. There are a lot of conservatives in Austin too, but I would say most people are more towards the center. I mean, that's it's one of the misconceptions that people have. Even Democrats were against it, just like even most Democratic voters are against a lot of the stuff going in schools. This
Yep.
isn't like a liberal thing. This is like a hard left thing, like progressive.
Mm-hmm.
So that became an ongoing issue until a group called Save Austin Now managed to get uh, a measure on the ballot. I believe this was in 2020 that would rescind or that would put the ban back in place. And sure enough, people voted to do just that. So those are some other areas where you see this progressivism trying to see, but like that probably wouldn't have happened in California, right?
No.
But even in Austin, that's why I say Austin is still Texas. It's just a more leftward version of Texas. But left in Texas is not the same thing as left in New York or in California. Mm-hmm. So there are areas. So when it's in their face, when it's in people's faces, then they'll push back. Because I'm telling you, I'm not even exaggerating. Like all over the place, it basically became many tent cities.
Sort of looking like San Francisco.
Precisely. Exactly. It was definitely headed in that direction. But the thing with the schools, the difference though is that you don't see that up front, right? You don't see exactly what's being taught. So that's why it's a harder sell. And I would imagine if something like that like the homeless issue happened in Oklahoma, you probably get a lot of the same result, because when you can see it, then you're going to do something.
Did you see any activism on behalf of left-leaning professors at UT Austin involved in this? That's something we see a lot because I'm in Norman. So we're very much sister cities, right? We're even both going into the SEC together, right? UT, OU, Texas, right? But what you're describing is the exact same thing, down to defund the police. The only city in Oklahoma to defund the police. We had a massive injection of homeless persons that came in after the defund the police movement, and I mean it's literally the exact same thing. But what we did have in conjunction with that is kind of some loud left-leaning activists involved in city government that were professors at the university. Have you seen any of that in Austin, or do you know of any of that?
Not specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like I know that. Well, actually, now that you mention it, I was hearing this was a few years ago, after the George Floyd issue, and there were professors that were involved in the protests and stuff like that. But most of these were just regular left-wing activists. Now after George Floyd, what we saw here in Austin, they had a Black Lives Matter rally during the day. This wasn't necessarily about the organization. This was just about outrage at what happened to George Floyd. And so I was there, I covered it, and it was thousands of people. And, they marched up on to the Capitol. It was peaceful. There was no violence, no nothing. So we had that. I mean, people in Austin will protest, like they do demonstrate.
Yeah.
But then in the aftermath of that, we had a lot of agitators coming in, some that are here and some that came from the outside. We had Antifa here, and they would protest at night, and I think I still have some of the footage from that. But they were marching through the streets. Now this wasn't as bad as it was in Minneapolis. They
right.
But a person did get killed. I mean, because this is Texas, so you had protesters and counter protesters with AR-15s, pistols. They had their guns because we love our guns here.
Yeah. And that's not going to be a good mixture.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and in general, it was fine. I mean, people march with guns here all the time, but there was an altercation between a couple people, so it wasn't like a full-on thing. But they were marching around, dumping trash cans, jumping cones, congregating where they weren't supposed to. I remember the police were there on their horseback trying to disperse the crowd. I mean, I got hit with tear gas a couple times because I would infiltrate. Because if I'm out there with a camera, nobody's going to question me for obvious reasons, right? Right. So they automatically think I'm on their side. So it's easy for me. So
stereotyping, that's the new left thing. So.
Yep, it's beautiful. But to answer your question. Yeah, we do have a lot of that here, and if something like that were to happen again, we would even see more protests. I mean, they were protesting the decision on Roe. So Austin is very politically active. I mean, I was just at a Let the Women Speak rally. I was covering that. I posted that on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, but and there wasn't a lot, but there was like 4 Antifa protesters that came through trying to disrupt people's speeches. So it's a thing here. It's just it doesn't get as violent. yet. Hopefully it doesn't.
Right. Well, and I think when you have states like Oklahoma or Texas that, you never know who's packing because that's the way it's kind of designed.
Hmm.
That's a deterrent to having things become more violent. Um, but I just find it very interesting. I've been studying college towns
Hmm.
and red state college towns because I'm from Missouri. And
Okay.
do you remember Michael Brown?
Yep.
And I'm sure you do. And Ferguson. Well, that's that led to in 2015 a giant mass protest movement that stemmed from the University of Missouri. That led to a whole DEI program. That led to that
Mm.
becoming one of I think the capital of wokeness in the Midwest,
Hmm.
in terms of the middle part of the country, and it's kind of spread out that direction. So I've been interested to see how that is, if that same thing is happening in Austin, because I am observing it in Norman. OU is one of it, for example, it houses what's called NCORE, which is one of the largest DEI training professional development, oldest one of the oldest ones too in the whole country. And it's they had Kimberly Crenshaw here,
Okay.
for as their headline speaker. They brought in Ibram Kendi before,
Of course.
right into, and this is red state Oklahoma. But what I'm finding, and this is what it's frustrating, and I'd be interested to see if you're seeing this in Texas, is that a lot of the officials here don't want to touch OU because OU has football, and
Mm.
football is the cash cow. Um, are you seeing any hesitancy from your whether your local or state leaders in dealing with maybe some of the problems that are stemming from the college into the schools, out into the streets, like we were just talking about,
Mhm.
as being kind of this bastion of wokeness in the city? Are you seeing any hesitancy on behalf of your elected officials to deal with that?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that I'm not seeing them speak out against it. I'm not seeing them do anything about it. I'm not even sure if they can do anything about it, but I'm
Yeah,
not seeing any. I think it's just pretty much a foregone conclusion that universities, most of them are very left leaning, they're very woke. And just like it happened here in Texas. I mean, when something like a George Floyd murder happens, then you've got they exploit that, right?
yeah.
They use that to introduce this stuff. So that was an opportunity for them, and they took that opportunity.
But why do you think it is? Why do you think it is that conservatives have just resigned the universities to being that's what it's going to be? Because, like you said, this is not a short process. They call it the long march to the institution. It's been happening since the '60s.
Hmm.
But we're talking about Texas and Oklahoma here, okay? We're not.
Hmm.
Let's remove the two of the reddest states in the country. Why is it that officials have just resigned? So this is an existential question. It's a larger question. Why do you think that red state officials have resigned their flagship universities in their reddest states in the country to just, they're going to be left too, and we'll just let that happen? And why do you think that they think that's not going to affect the way that their state goes in the future?
Well, unfortunately, because that's what we do. That's what conservatives do. That's what Republicans do. At least up until this point, that's what we have done. I mean, I ask the same, or I get asked the same question when it comes to the Republican Party trying to court non-white voters. Well, black people vote 90% for Democrats. Well, I guess we'll just have to resign and just give up.
Yeah.
Like no, it was your giving up that led to that in the first place, right? It was your allowing that to happen in the universities that led to that in the first place. I
Hmm.
mean, we're just now starting to get back involved in the culture because we basically the left fights for something, they infiltrate it, they play the long game, and Republicans get so comfortable that they're thinking, oh, nothing's going on. And then when it happens, they're like, oh, well, I guess it's too late. I guess we're just gonna have
Yep.
to just sit back and whine about it on the airwaves all day. Like
Or we're going to have to retreat. It's
retreat,
like,
yeah.
oh, let's go do our own thing. And it's like,
Hmm.
I think this happened in public schools in the '60s, for example, when prayer got removed from school. You had a lot of conservatives, and then this is just one anecdotal issue that I think was systemic along. But when they saw the secularization, or Christians or conservatives or whatever you want to call it, saw the secularization of public schools, they were like, yeah, we're just going to go do our own homeschool thing. We're going to do, start our
Hmm.
own kind of private schools and just remove ourselves from the institution that is educating 95% of our kids and think nothing is going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's frustrating. Like I said, that's what we do. We run. I mean, it's like even when people were talking about moving from blue states to red states, I mean, you had your influencers saying, "Yeah, leave California, leave whatever." Now, I mean, if that's what people need to do to protect their families or to make sure that they have a better standard of living, I don't knock that. But it's like that's our first instinct: run away. Well,
Yeah.
what makes you? Well, yeah, you run away to Texas, okay, great. But you're going to be dealing with the same crap in 10, 20
Right.
years because look at what's happening. The
Right.
left does not run. We do. And
Exactly.
you know, I'm all for homeschooling. I think it's a great thing, but not everybody can do it. So
Yep.
to me, and like like here in Texas, we have our next legislative session next year, and school choice is going to be the top issue. And
Hmm.
believe it or not, Texas does not have school choice being a red state. We've had people trying to make that happen, but it hasn't. But now, because of this whole school issue, school choice is in the forefront again. And
Hmm.
I'm very confident that they will get something passed. I'm hoping it'll be something as extensive as what they have in Arizona, because if you have that choice, then maybe in the future you don't have to run. Maybe when these public schools realize that they'll lose you, then that will be yet another way to pressure them to start paying attention to what parents want. So
Can
so
I
to,
can I play devil's advocate there for a second?
yeah.
Because it seems that we've had a bit of a, I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance on the school choice issue. Now, we were just talking about leaving the institutions,
Mhm.
and even so, for example, in Florida is massive school choice, right?
Yeah.
And they're obviously doing some good things with that, but still, a majority of the kids are educated in public schools there.
Yep.
What couldn't you consider school choice a retreat?
So yeah,
As opposed to, because if you take the people who are most likely to be upset
mhm.
with the way schools are going and you remove them and put them in various different private institutions, you still seeded the ground of the public school.
Yeah. So
Um,
yeah, so I was
yeah.
actually getting to that part. The thing
Okay.
about the school choice is it's like a free market principle.
Hmm.
If because I mean you might not pull your kid out and put him in a private school or homeschool. You might just want to send him to another public school that isn't pushing the woke stuff because they're not
Hmm.
all doing it. So to me, and school choice alone is not the answer. I'm just
Hmm.
saying this is just one of several things that need to happen, because when these schools know that they can lose the students, because they lose money when that happens, that's why they're against it. If you attack them in their pocketbooks, that will be yet another way to pressure them. But that alone isn't going to do it, right? So you do need school choice so that parents have more of more control over where and how their kids are educated. Because that way, if there is that threat that
Hmm.
all these parents are going to pull their kids out, that might push them more. Also, as more of this stuff gets exposed, more parents will be more involved. And you know, there's also that type of legislation. There's also like parental rights education, like you saw in
Hmm.
Florida. So there's a lot of different strategies that we have to bring to bear to stop this stuff. School choice is just one of them. And plus,
Yeah.
I support school choice just on principle. I mean,
Hmm.
if you're a parent, you should have a choice as to where your kids learn. So,
Right.
but yeah, I
Right.
mean,
Well, and again, I've been, and just full. I've been critical of school choice. Not,
mhm,
I want to be for school choice. Does that make sense? Like, I
yep,
want to be, like, in
yep,
my heart, but
yeah,
I have but I've taught in a private school. I've taught in public school. I've been an administrator in a private
mhm,
school, and I've seen how they work. And my concern is I see a lot of parallels between the university model and private school model.
you're not
Um,
wrong.
yeah, because for example, parents can vote with their feet,
Yep,
right? If if you got a stipend and you can move it from school to school, but what they can't do is walk up to the board of the school and protest that board and vote them out, because the board of a private school, you'll never know their names,
right,
and you'll see the head of school, and like a university president, there's no accountability other than the board.
right.
And so I do you fear that there might be a loss of some ability for parents to actually change the way schools 20 years from now will
Mhm.
go if they don't have the ability to walk up to their school board? Because I think some of the reason that conservatives have lost the public schools is because they've ignored the school boards, right? Well,
Yeah.
if we take away that mechanism, what are we going to do 20 years from now if, say, I don't know, private schools go woke?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that up because I was actually thinking of that myself. I mean, and this is why I say that school choice is not the only strategy. If we're only banking on school choice, then you're right. It is seeding the ground. It's just giving it to
Yeah.
them.
Hmm.
But the school boards are an issue too. And over the past year, there have been a record number of conservatives running for school board positions because of
Hmm.
this. It's
Hmm.
all over the country. I mean, I don't know if you saw what happened in Florida earlier this year when they had their primaries.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
mean, there were a couple school boards that flipped.
Yep. Hmm.
So to me, it we do have to be fighting on that front too, but that is a more long-term strategy because one, you have to flip the school boards first, then even implementing the policies to get all that crap out of there. That's a long-term focus too. What do we do with the kids who are stuck in these schools right now? I
Yeah.
mean, they're going to suffer. While the kids in the future might benefit if we do our job right, but the kids that are dealing with it now, I mean, there's not a whole lot I mean, there are things we can do. We can keep exposing it because, like I said, the more people who know about this, the more allies we will have. So, school
Hmm.
choice is just one component. Taking over school boards is just one component. Laws passed at the state level, one component. We've also got to address this societally by having these conversations with our neighbors, our friends, our families. I believe. I mean, and I don't know if you're a Christian or, but I
Yes.
believe pastors need to stop being silent on this stuff. That's one of the things that's pissing me off right
Yes.
now. Yeah, yeah. Pastors are supposed to be involved in their communities, so they should be
Hmm.
calling this stuff out. I get the whole Johnson Amendment thing, but if they're not on the pulpit, they can say what they want.
Well,
So there's no
and
reason why they shouldn't be calling this out.
that doesn't carry the teeth that they think it does, and I believe
It
Trump.
doesn't.
They, I believe Trump did some things to water that down even,
He
but
did.
you can see, and especially the black churches across the country are very political, and
Yep.
nobody ever messes with them. You know what
That
I'm saying?
that amendment rarely gets used. I don't even know if it's even been successfully used against a church yet.
No, I don't. I think it was more of an intimidation factor.
Yeah.
I think Johnson. If you look at the time frame, Johnson had that push through right around the time that Martin Luther King started talking ill of the Vietnam War. You know what I
Uh,
mean? And so I think that was more intimidation factor at the point. But I agree with you. I think that okay, when you're talking about abortion, well, not even abortion, but let's just stay off that topic because it's abortion. But when you're talking about mutilating kids, when you're talking
mhm,
about taking kids and little girls who are 10, 12, 16, 15, and removing healthy breast tissue
mhm.
under state sanction by a doctor, pastors should be able to get involved in that conversation and be stalwart about it because guess what? I mean, my mama used to say, God didn't make no mistakes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And just to take it back to to church there for a second, but why don't we see pastors out there saying, "Hey, stop medically transitioning kids who have no idea of who they want to be or who they're going to want to be in the future."
I have no idea. I really don't understand this. I've been listening to some interviews. I'm sure you're familiar with Eric Metaxas.
Oh yeah,
He wrote that book Bonhoeffer, which I need to read.
yes.
Um,
Oh, it's a great book. Yeah.
yeah, that was a pastor who spoke out, but there were other pastors in Germany who didn't want to.
Hmm.
And it's like because it's like almost like they have this safety in their lane. They think that their lane is just pastoring their flock, preaching the gospel. Yeah, yeah, that is part of your lane. But as a leader in Christ, you're also supposed to call stuff out. I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, you always had prophets, you had priests who would call things out. When David was cutting up, who called him out? of
Yeah.
prophets.
But you don't even have to go to the Old Testament, brother. Look at Jesus. He said, "Oh, you brood of vipers." He went out and he turned
Yes.
the tables in the temple. That's what because I've been talking to so many Christians. I'm a Christian, and I've been talking to so many Christians, and they're like, "Well, we have to peace, love," and I was like, "There's such thing as tough love." Jesus went into his house and turned over the table because
Yes.
they were corrupting his house. He talked to the leaders of his church who were deceiving the people and called them a brood of vipers because not doing so
Hmm.
would equal more harm, more damage for his flock.
Exactly. And what did Jesus say about John the Baptist? I heard Eric Metaxas bring this up. Why was John the Baptist executed? Because he called out the king. He called out a
Yep.
government official. And no pastor today has to worry about being beheaded. So to
Right.
me, there's no excuse. And I've been wrestling with this. I mean, I'm not a pastor, but still,
Right.
the church has lost so much influence. There's a whole study about it that came out by the Barna Group. I'm actually going to be speaking with Pastor Jack Hibbs later today, and I'm going to ask him this question. That this is why I want to talk to him, because he's one of the few that are actually speaking out on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say it has to be multi-pronged. Like I look at this from a legislative issue, legal, like people need to be filing lawsuits against these schools. It needs to be exposed. That's what people like you and I are doing. But this is also deeply spiritual. I
Yes.
mean, that's the foundation of this whole thing. I mean, I mean, where else can an idea like cutting off a teenage girl's breast come from? That has to come from the pit, right? That has to come from the
Yeah, I mean,
evil, right?
it's a perversion. It's a
Yeah,
perversion of. I had a great pastor who always said, the devil doesn't create anything; he only perverts. You can only take what's
exactly.
there and invert it, and that's I think, and regardless of whether you're Christian or not, you, you have to admit that there's a force, whether you want to call it spiritual, whether you want to call it
Hmm.
mass formation psychosis, whether you want to call it, just the bad influence of television or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
There's a force here that is pushing us down a corruption of things that are good. And I think that's what you see that most. You can see it in the civil rights movement too, right? It's like what Martin Luther King did was good, but now they're trying to co-opt it and turn it into something which is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And so, but pastors have to understand that if they don't speak out, they're not going to be able to soon. That's my concern.
It's a valid concern because how else could it turn out? I mean, if you don't say something now, I mean, I don't care if the congregation's only like 20 people
Mhm,
or if your congregation's 100,000 people, you have a platform.
mhm.
This is going to sound corny, but I mean, it's like, what Uncle Ben taught Peter Parker: with great power comes great responsibility. God has granted you a platform and you should be using it for these things. And that's how even I feel about what I do. I'm not a pastor, but I have a platform. So
Yep.
to me, like if I don't use this to speak out against the evil that is happening, then why would God even give it to me in the first place? Like this is beyond politics. Like, yeah, we
Right.
can argue about policy, stuff like that,
Right.
or economic policy. Yeah, that's fine. But what we're talking about here is actual evil,
Yeah.
actual demonic evil. And we should be speaking out against it. And so I really do want to understand why there are pastors who think that they shouldn't be getting involved in the culture or in politics, because I just don't see any biblical foundation for that. Maybe I'm
How,
missing something, but I don't think I am.
well, let me throw something at you. How much of it do you think is monetary? Because uh, it's. I grew up in a culture, the word of faith movement, and I think my parents got sucked into it. The televangelist, big market gospel. And I just see how much of it do you think is monetary here? How much do you think of the callousness or the cowardice in the face of what is evil is just, I don't want to lose my bottom line.
I really hate to say this, but I think you're onto something there. I mean, the study, or one of the studies that I looked at when I was researching this issue, it was Gallup poll. And in 1999, there was a Gallup poll that showed that 70% of Americans had a membership in a church. So they would go, regularly. That number as of 2020 dropped to 47%. Church attendance has tanked. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I've spoken with Pastor Demetrius Minor, Pastor Daryl Scott, who's one of Trump's good friends. And I asked them, why is this happening? And they had different answers, but they both said the same thing. Pastors are not taking a stand anymore. They want people to feel good. They want people to come in and get the warm fuzzies. It's why maybe I won't name names, but you've got these pastors who sound more like motivational speakers.
Name names, brother. You're in Texas. I know where you're going, but
yeah, he's about 2 hours east of me.
Yeah, I got you.
I'm talking about Joel Osteen. I mean, that's obvious, but it's not just him, and it's not necessarily that what they're saying is wrong. I mean, sometimes it is, but a lot of what they say is right, but it's incomplete. It's the polar opposite of preachers who just do hellfire and brimstone, right? Because that's bad too. And I think what's happened is that, when I was a kid, a teenager, there was a culture of, you have to be self-righteous. You can't be real about who you are because people will judge you. I get that. But now the pendulum has swung way in the other direction where everything is good. You're perfect. God loves you, which God does love you. He loves everybody. But when it comes to these issues, you don't want to take a stand. Like the feel good stuff is what keeps what gets people into church. At least this is what I think they think, which means that they get those tithes, they get those donations. But are they really being equipped to do what they're supposed to be doing?
It's all Jello and no steak. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like, but here's my issue.
They don't stand for anything.
Right. Yes. They don't stand. They just lay there and they're like, hey, everybody feel real good, and everybody. But I think that there's a monetary incentive to that because you catch more flies with honey than you do with, shit. And so it gets concerning to me though. This is my problem with the free market idea when it comes to now hold on. I am a free market capitalist. Let me just
count me.
No. But when you have a market that appears free, but is actually being tilted in one direction underneath your and just to touch on the school choice for the thing, I'm a fine arts teacher, right? I sold my school. It cost $25,000 a year to go to the school I taught at. And they would walk through the door because the school said it had good academics, but they would stay because of me, right? They would stay because of the sports. They would stay because of the theater. They would stay because of the music. Now, again, I'm somebody who teaches that, but that's not what the focus of school should be, right? But it ends up what's selling the schools. And so you take that now, take that to churches. If the monetary incentive is just to give people everything good that they want, to hear, how on earth with a free market system like that are we ever going to get the meat back before the jello? That's a hard thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And I would even push back a little bit because I do believe that what you said is probably what these pastors think is going to happen. But, I talked to one of the pastors I talked to, and I think he's right about this. When people are going to church, they do want a transformative experience. And when you go in and everything is kisses and sunshine, they might think that they're getting that, but they're really not. I think that a message that says, hey, you know what? You're not perfect. You sin and you got to deal with that. But you know what? God loves you anyway, and God is going to give you that transformational experience. And I hate to put it this way. I think that would get more of the money flowing because you get more people in. You'd get more people who stay because they recognize that they have an issue. They already know they have an issue because even if they don't know it consciously, there's a reason why they first start going to church because they feel like something is missing.
Yeah.
And so you're basically giving them the honey and the cake without telling them without helping them identify what's missing inside of them. So it's a shallow, superficial experience. I think a lot of those people end up leaving. And to me, it's like your job is to win souls to Christ, not to make money. But I think when you have more of a congregation and they're tithing, then that's going to happen. At the same time, you shouldn't be doing this just for money. Yeah, I get you got to live. I mean, I'm not knocking that. But at the same time, your job isn't to run a business per se.
Right.
Your job is to win souls to Christ and to
Right.
impact the community around you.
And
And that's what they're not doing.
And I think that's where if you want to use the term intersection here between the market and the church, is
Hmm.
it? I don't think the church should be a free market enterprise at all. I think, well, I mean, free market in that you can decide where you go, but it should not be a business at all.
Right. It
And
shouldn't
and
be
and
approached that
and
way.
and when you're talking about television and what COVID did to churches, because lots of people now just sit in front of their computer and watch church like they watch Netflix. Well, where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am also. It doesn't say where two or three watch on Zoom, there I am also. And I think that pastors need to get away from the Kenneth Copeland model. They need to get away from constantly live streaming everything and
Right.
offer things that, hey, a good experience that you can only get when you walk through the doors. And I
Hmm.
think that would help them know their congregations better so that they
Yeah.
can approach some of the subjects like the woke issue, like the trans issue, like the other thing with more confidence, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so it actually, because we just lost so much connection with the COVID that hasn't come back. Have you seen that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they managed to shut churches down. I mean, and churches had never been shut down like that,
Ever.
yeah, ever really. And a lot of pastors gave into that, and that did create more separation because now people are comfortable just watching it from home,
Hmm.
and you don't have as many people being involved. I mean, every church should have different types of ministries that you can get involved in. And I'm kind of convicting myself too, because I've actually been meaning to get involved in my church here,
Yeah.
and I just haven't yet. But I'm saying this to myself too. I
Yeah.
mean, a church is supposed to be a community, not something that you just watch. Even if you're going in person, it's supposed to be a community, not just something that you sit down for an hour, hour and a half and watch and then go home and forget about it. You're supposed to
Right.
be more involved. I mean, churches have like midweek Bible studies and groups and stuff like that. That's what's supposed to happen. But if it's not, then I understand why church attendance has gone down. I mean, there's other reasons too,
Yes,
but at
there are.
the same time, if you're not really encouraging that, and on top of that, you don't really stand for anything, you're not really talking about what's going on in the world and how it affects the Christian and how it affects everybody else and what we should be doing to fight against that. I mean, what's the point?
Yeah, and I think that's where us millennials. I mean, I'm right on the cusp of Gen X and millennials, so I'm like
Me
30.
too.
I'm 38. I'm 38. So, but it's, and I think it's a weird situation. I don't know about you. How old are you? You don't mind
I'm
me asking?
42. I was born in the
Okay,
80s.
so yeah, so we're right in that same area. We would have been in high school together or close to it. And
Hmm.
it's it's a weird time because I remember what it was like to not have a cell phone. I remember what it's like to not have the internet, but I also can't remember it at all. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like I don't know how it feels anymore. I
yeah.
can remember it, but I don't know how it feels. And it's a strange spot to see because everything used to be involvement, whether it was church, whether it was school, whether it was. It's a strange thing to see at this age. Everything flips so quickly, and I think you're
Mhm.
right. I think you've really hit on something that people our age specifically we need to understand that. Wait, in order to be in order to be influential, we have to be involved.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not just the church's fault. It's actually because we're coming of age. We're the ones that are actually moving the economy right now. We're the ones that are going to be the energy in a church. Well, if we just show up, where's the energy? If we don't show up and help and get involved, if the clergy is all, you know 50, 70, 80 years old, where's
Yeah.
the energy? What
Yeah. There is no energy. You
how
know,
do
that
how do
reminds.
how do we change it, man? How do we kick ourselves in the butt and get us moving?
Yeah. That's something that I'm trying to explore. I'm trying to figure that out. I mean, I think it was Chris Ballatin. He said the amount of, and I'm probably going to butcher this quote, but the amount of influence you have is directly tied to the value that you bring. So basically, you can't influence people if they don't benefit from you, if they don't trust you, if they don't like you. If you're not actually bringing something to the table, you're not going to influence anybody.
Mhm.
Um, And that's something that I've held very close to my heart over the years since I first heard it. You know, I I'm not sure how to reverse that trend because you brought up the whole internet thing, but I mean the people younger than us, they grew up in a world where they have no idea what it's like to not have a cell phone. They're immersed in this,
Hmm.
and it's brought a lot of good, but it's also done some harm. So I think
Yeah.
a lot of it's going to involve using our platforms to discuss these issues and maybe hopefully light a fire in people. But beyond that, getting involved in our local communities, that's going to help. But I don't know. This is something I've been chewing on for a little while. So it's interesting that you asked that. So hopefully one of us will find the
Right.
answer.
Yeah. 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 If you get the answer, brother, you let me know because I've been chewing on it too, and it's like, but it's also, I know you got to go, and I want to respect your time. And I really appreciate you being here, but it's like,
Yeah, no problem.
um, it's hard because I also feel like and not to make this a generational, I feel like the boomers aren't letting go. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you look at Biden, you look at Pelosi, you look at, I mean, these octogenarians, even Trump. Okay, we can even throw Trump in there,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
These octogenarians who have just held on past the point of their, best years, so to speak.
Hmm.
It's robbed people of the Gen X generation, of the millennial generation, the opportunities to move things, to have a shot at this, to have the Kennedy moment, a new generation born in this century kind of thing,
Hmm.
not necessarily this, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Uh, do you see that as a problem? Because I do.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are people who don't want to pass the torch,
Yeah.
and they're going to have to eventually because they can't hold on to it forever. But I do see that as a problem. Yeah, honestly, I think that's one of the reasons. As weird as it sounds, I think that's one of the reasons why Trump won in 2016. Why he beat out all of his primary opponents. They all represented the old way of doing things. And even though Trump is old, he doesn't have an old approach.
Yes. He had
He's
his
not a part of
finger.
the. He's not
He
part
was
of the
on
old
Twitter.
guard.
He was on
He's
Twitter.
on Twitter. Yeah, exactly.
And I
No,
honestly
you're
think that's why he's
exactly
less
right.
effective right now. I think he's less effective right now because he's stuck over in True Social and has
Yep.
no. But you're right. That's all right. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no,
You're
no,
straight
you're
up.
right. So basically, he's an older guy, but he has a younger approach. So I think so for him, it worked. But if you look at everybody else, I mean, does Mitch McConnell even use a computer? I
Right.
mean,
Is
come on.
Nancy Pelosi? I mean, can she, update her own phone? I mean,
Right.
or anything like that.
Yeah. But you do see the new crop coming up. I
Yeah.
mean, and some of them I like, some of them I don't like. I like most of them, but I mean, you see like the more youthful um uh people coming up. Like you've got your AOCs, Ilhan Omar, you've got your Marjorie
Ron
Taylor
DeSantis.
Greens. Yeah, Ron DeSantis. Yeah, I mean he's like basically our age. I
Yeah.
mean, you see him, and people like Myra Flores. I mean, there's quite a bit. So that is coming up, but especially on the Republican side, I don't know how bad this is on the Democratic side. That old guard is holding on for dear life,
Yes.
but hopefully, yeah, they'll have to let go soon.
Well, and I think when that does happen, it's going to be a transition period because I think that there's a lot of people our age who are afraid to wield power. They're
Mm,
afraid or to exercise the inherent power in the authority that they might get because everything has been deferred for so long it's almost become a habit. You know what I
right.
mean? And that's what I see in lots of people my age in differing um, industries. Whether it's politics or it's business or whatever. It's they have a tendency to say, "Well, fix it for me," or to look up to the authority figure in the room and not necessarily just say, "I need to be decisive, make a decision."
Right.
And I think that's part of what you're being trained in schools. People our age, there was some indoctrination in there too. We didn't
Oh yeah.
realize it. If we look back on it, there was some, hey, let the state take care of it for you
Hmm.
kind of mentality being pushed on us. And that's what we have to stop, whether that's through school choice, whether that's through, and I think you're absolutely right. It has to be a myriad of things. And we have to make
Yeah.
sure that things like school choice don't turn into the trap that I'm afraid it might be. We have to get pastors involved and make sure that we, as millennials, as Gen Xers, step up to the plate, especially in the red states, because there's so many of us here who actually see what's happening when the older people do not. And we need to
Yes,
be loud.
exactly.
We need to be forceful. We need to stand up for what we believe, and we need to actually get our damn butts in church. All right.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, Jeff, I want to be respectful of your time. Tell everybody how to find you again. Give us your Twitter handle and make sure that everybody knows where they can follow your work.
Yeah, you can get me on Twitter and Instagram at Jeff on the Right for both. You can read my stuff on redstate.com, libertynation.com, Newsweek Opinion. You can check out my satire articles at smatteringnews.substack.com. And check out my podcast. It's called A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. It's on YouTube and also wherever you get your audio podcasts.
Awesome, Jeff. It was a great conversation, man. I hope to have you back on. I hope to visit your podcast too. So,
yeah, definitely. You got to come on.
Yeah, I will. Anytime, brother. Anytime. Well, thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
You got it. Thank you.
Yeah.